Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the current step in our development process and my design process. I'm working on trying to generate monsters in a unique way, and I've arrived at this stage after doing a lot of this economy design, and that relates to the item generation, how many stats certain items should have, at what level, and this sheet has been constantly iterated on with new things, monsters, item generation logic, how many of the different types of items will be available at certain levels. And then we need to know kind of how much file size that's going to be kind of in the back end. Um, what else? Let's see. There's other sheets here. And then one thing new that I created a few days ago was, um, I guess a part of the economy design is knowing how much damage your skills are going to do. So I created this average damage multiplier that's essentially for these offensive abilities, the average damage it'll do. So here you can see a two range, min and a max. It's just a random range, and I've aggregated all of them here in this column. And then certain abilities that deal damage to all enemies, um, I multiplied by two under the impression that combat encounters will average at around two monsters on the enemy's side. And then currently it's set up so you could face from one to three different enemies. And then so I just averaged that. This might change, um, but I wanted to kind of just do an exercise to better visualize the damage scaling for these skills. So I created this sheet for the different classes, the warrior, ranger, and the mage. At what level will they acquire these abilities, these skills, and then what's the average damage? So you can see here the warrior in blue gets a skill here, and then it's a target all ability, which explains the increase, and then um, kind of lowers at level 20 to do less damage. But there are a few caveats here. Um, for the warrior, namely being that this one has secondary or tertiary abilities like a stun chance, a bleed chance, and these things aren't factored into this. Um, I imagine you could do something like that where you can figure out the average damage of a bleed at this level, but for our sake, it was just ruled out because of kind of our resources and our limited resources, limited time. But yeah, I did the same for different classes. And I mean, this was mostly just an exercise for me. But it also helped me to see, like, oh, why does the spell sword have such a high damage dealing thing? And I can see here, it's like, okay, let's see their stats. How much HP do they have? MP, um, at what level? And does it seem fair in relation to the other classes at that level? And real quick as well, we added two more stats, HP regen and MP regen. How they work is on the beginning of your turn, whatever your HP regen, MP regen stat is, that's the amount you'll get back at the beginning of your turn. So yeah, so this is the warrior second class damage averages, and then we have the rangers, and then these lines are just the trajectory in which these skills kind of line up. This one looks like it's going down, the marksman, but that's so this actually is because this skill needs to be changed. So it's not going to be this low once we get to it, but for now that's just where it stands. And then the mage, we have the priest, just has two offensive abilities, so this is going to be a little inconsistent. But these abilities also deal true damage, which means it ignores defenses. So this may need a little balancing, but at the same time, the priest doesn't really have many offensive abilities, so it probably won't change too much. But off the top of my head, this does seem a little high, especially if it's not dealing with defenses. So yeah, that gives us a good sense of like the past few months have just been like balancing things, economy, getting things right, changing these multipliers for different rarities, um, to make sure that, oh yeah, common items are probably like I don't really want them, but ultra rares were just so much better than any of these, and that was a little inconsistent to what we wanted the design to be like. So we changed some of these numbers to be a little lower, and um, yeah, so real quickly, every time there's an increase in the rarity, there's an additional stat. So it's starting at 1 at baseline. Uncommons will have 2 stats, and both of those stats will be multiplied by 1.1. So this will be 2.2 times better than the common one on average. This one will be 3.45 times better than the common one on average, and so on and so forth. So it made sense to lower these numbers because with each increase in the tier of rarity, you still get a pretty significant increase to these rarities, to these power levels. And another thing that I added was to, I guess, add a little bit of, I guess you could call it like end game content, end game grind in a sense. Once you get to level 100, the items that you'll find will have a slightly higher power level. So it just has an additional like max level item modifier, and that kind of creates a separation of items before level 100 and items at level 100. And that was intentional because I wanted to create that separation so that when you're max level, it makes more sense to use max level items than um, lower level ones. And yeah, there could be instances where you find a really good like weapon or item, whatever, at a lower level, but it's going to lessen that chance, which is what the intention was with the max level item modifier. Okay, so that brings us to our current standing, which is monsters. So I have kind of a list here. I have another list elsewhere, but yeah, I should probably consolidate some of these things. Let's see. Hopefully there's nothing here. I'm supposed to see monster list. Um, yeah, so these things kind of need a little bit of updating, but essentially it's like what's the level range? I think I have this in 2 different places actually. Tamables, mobs. Yeah, I think I do. Okay, so this is the monsters in relation to the economy. Okay, so that's fine. Level ranges, stat modifiers, and I probably went over this before in another video, but things have changed since yesterday. Um, so different monsters are going to have different stat modifiers. And so what that is going to be is kind of to give certain monsters certain characteristics. So in the example I gave before, a fire elemental shouldn't do like a lot of physical damage. It should do fire damage. So what I created in the code was a way to kind of define that sort of behavior, but more generally for now. So we have these different modifiers balanced, meaning kind of just it can be any stat and it'll just increment. It probably won't have like a fire damage or elemental damage, but it'll scale with HP, physical damage, defense, those kind of general stats that makes sense for any enemy to have. Um, so I haven't changed any of this on this sheet, but we can see here. Um, so first we'll just show kind of the enemies, I guess. So these are their different prefabs for our enemies, and you can see we have quite a few. Um, yeah, so just a bunch of different enemies. They're tameable enemies, which are the pets. Different bosses, which are currently all dragons and a few golems that we have. Um, yeah, so just wanted to show that real quick. And then we have here these monsters, the Bat, Berserker, Bomb, Chest Monster, Headhunter. These are examples of monsters that I want to characterize as more offensive monsters. And then defensive, the Golems, the Hermits, the Rhino, the Agile ones, the Rats, Spectre the Spider, the Brawny ones, Lizard, Black Knight, Lizard Warrior, Turtle Shell, blah, 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 then the spellcaster types. And then every other monster is defaulted to be that balanced, to have a balance modifier. And then we'll generate a few monsters to give an example of that. But so currently, how I have it set up is that I have a list of all these stats that the monster um, can have as they increase in power level, and how often it should be it should be chosen. So when I say strength 3, dex 3, and 3, what happens in the back end is essentially it's going to say, okay, strength, 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 int, and because int is there 3 times. And I know dex and con are as well, but we have like, okay, fire res. Fire res is there just once. So based on this number, so you multiply these two essentially, and then you put them in a giant list. And then what the system does is, okay, I'll pick this one, I'll pick this one, I'll pick this one again. And when the same stat is chosen twice, it'll actually lower that stat because we don't want a case where a monster is just too imbalanced. Like there is a chance, although almost impossibly low, that it can just get physical damage like 20 times, and that's not what we want. It might one-shot the player. It's just kind of creates for a bad experience. So my way around that was to use the same retry mechanism that I have in the item generation, where essentially what happens, or I can just show you in the monster generator, retries. It finds a stat. If that stat is already on the monster, it'll look for a different stat, and otherwise, like it'll keep retrying until it finds a different stat, and then it'll retry 2 times. I have it here, and if it still has the same stat, it will where is it? Do I not have it here? It should be there. Retries. Oh, it's over here. I moved it up here. Yes, the stat already has that bonus. It gets 1 minus 66%, so it loses 66% of what that stat value would be. So if it was 100 strength, it got 100 strength the first time, and then the second time it chose it, and the second time it chose it again, and then it chose it again. Um, we won't retry anymore, but instead what we'll do is we'll penalize the stat and give it 33 strength instead of, or I guess 34 strength instead of the full 100. And that diminishes the likelihood of a monster that has too high of one stat. And then it'll continue this process until it has the power level that it should at the level that it is. So it's quite a complex process, but they serve their purposes and seems to be working well for our items as well as our monsters. So I actually need to go over these things some more. Offensive modifiers, you'll see has more strength, dex, and int, less con, more physical damage, more magical damage, but still veering away from adding these elemental damages because it's just going to be a lot of numbers on the screen at one time, and I want to avoid that where I can. Defensive modifiers, more constitution, more regen, more defenses, things like that. Agile, more dex, more crit chance. Brawny, kind of a lot of these things, less dex, less int, more HP, more regen, a little bit more damage, a little bit more defense, things like that. Spellcasters, a lot more int, less strength, less dex, more magical damage. And here we could maybe even add some of these elemental damages. Um, but yeah, so this is, I guess you could consider almost legacy code at this point, um, that we had. I think it was like 3 months ago, where I was trying to create a base kind of like interface for our different mobs. So each specific mob is going to have at least these stats. You can see that I zeroed out everything, but over here you can see an example. A bat is going to have these things. It's always going to have at least 75 HP. It's always going to do 25 damage. And since it's a bat, I thought it would make sense to give it some lifesteal as well. Um, and I may keep this to really specify certain monsters' characteristics, because this would just work really well. It already does that. Um, but some challenges would be that um, the monsters are going to be maybe too similar to each other, and that could be, I guess, intentional in some ways. Um, but yeah, and other times it won't be. So I think this will it'll be here for certain monsters, but probably not for all monsters like I have. And the reason why I say that is because, let's see here, where are the monsters? Yeah, so just quickly, actually I've already generated, it's going to take a few minutes to do it again. So what I have here is that monster generator script. Um, Here we can see from 1 to 10, we multiply their level by 4, which is the power level that we want at these lower levels. And you can see that there is a ramp up in the multiplications for these monster levels, as the level increases. So at level 10, it'll be 10 times 4, which is the monster will have a power level of around 40 plus the baseline. Um, and then at 30, it'll be 30 times 9, which is 270. So it's quite a steep increase. And then at level 100, monsters are just going to be much higher in difficulty. So what that means is at level 99, we have 99 times 25. So it's going to be around 2,475 power level. And then at level 100, it's going to be 4,000. So it's like a 1,500 increase in power level, which I'm not sure makes too much sense right now, but thanks to our great sheet over, where is it? Here, I can see that a player at level 100 will have an average power level around 2,300. And you might be thinking, oh wait, that's not even close to 4,000. How is that fair? But this is assuming that every item piece is at rarity level 2. Um, at rarity level 4, you actually see an increase of 4.6 per rare item. So if we were to increase that, you can see that it gets closer to the 4,000 range. Um, but even here, you can see that this is on average for the highest rarity. So at the very upper like tier of that, you could even get something. A player can find items to give them this much power level per item, and you can see here that it's a little higher than that. But at the same time, thinking about it now, it does seem quite difficult to get to that 4,000 range. But still, we could work around that by maybe not introducing too many high level monsters until a certain point, or too many level 100 monsters until a certain point, making them more rare to come by, but maybe giving them more like better drop rates and things like that. So essentially, like higher the challenge, higher the reward kind of thing. Um, so yeah, so okay, so here, so there's a random multipliers to make them slightly stronger or not. Um, Duplicate stat multiplier. Um, let's see, yeah, and the different monster types we have here, all the monster types essentially. We can generate all of them or just a bandwagon. Um, so I've just been testing with the bandwagon, so we'll just do that. We can go to level 1, just delete these. Level 1, we'll generate 3 of them, generate monsters, and we'll do the same for the level 100 one as well. Just to see the differences in the levels. Okay, so these are the ones we generated. We can see their stats. Their HPs are slightly different, just looking at their HP. And then their damage, 8.5, 8.5. This one does a little bit more. It has more defenses as well. MP region I might just take out of enemies, or I could keep it. We'll see. But yeah, you see initiatives are changing. So you have the same enemy, generally similar stats, but there is some variability, which I think, in my opinion, adds to the gameplay. You're not facing the same mob over and over again. I guess there are some instances where you do want that, but for me, I think this kind of adds to that the gameplay. So here at level 100, we should see more variability here. So we see that already 2,000 HP, and then all of a sudden almost 7,000. And here 4,500, and then we can look kind of more into the stats. 300 strength, 400, 3, 4, 4, 2, almost 3, almost 3. A little bit more balance than this one. This one has more dex, lots of physical damage. Um, 18, 11, 16, 15, 2000. So yeah, we see that the damage is generally close to each other, which is a good thing in my opinion. But there is some variability. These resistances are quite high. I don't know why the wind resistance isn't getting there. Initiative is capped out on this guy as well as this guy. So this might mean it's too easy to cap out initiative. That might be an okay thing, but yeah, initial assumption is to probably lower um, that number, the 40 over here, or yeah, this one. So let's see what's going on here. Looks like, I don't know, it should be up here, balance modifiers, wind resistance, yeah, so I forgot to add this here. And that should balance like almost every stat out, which is a good thing. Um, and another thing too is adding more of these stats kind of adds to more variability, which I like in my opinion. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of monster generation. We can try it again with the wind resistance to see if that changes anything. Let's see. So yeah, 6,000, 6,000, 45. Again, resistances are capped out. This guy's initiative isn't capped out, probably because some of those stats went into the resistances. Let's see, the regen around there. 1,300, that one has a lot more damage. Um, but yeah, so far it does seem like monster generation is at a decent spot, which is good news. So yeah, I don't need these monsters at all. Just testing them a little bit. But yeah, that's where we're at currently. And yeah, thanks for watching.